A lot of things changed in that small seashell of a town the day they chopped down the cherry tree. And sometimes after I couldn't recall if it had been dead for a day, or years, or even months, or just mere minutes. But it was so clear among the things that changed was my tender and sweet grandmother. She was good fun, but she hid things. All those days back then seemed to curl around each other, bending into a neatly bound yarn that we used to warm our hands during those winter winds. And it was hard to determine exactly when I became aware of that cherry tree. But I knew I'd started one freezing winter day. We packed up early in the morning, before we could even find our noses. My brother and I were going in and out of our coma of sleep. Dad came in, shaking us in the bed of the night. "Hey boys, hey, let's go," he'd say. Unable to even form any sentences, we defaulted to muttering and motions, pushing him away with clammy hands and gibberish. "Come on, get up. We're going to Grandma's house now. Get going," he rallied us on. "Grammy's?" my brother lazily yawned out. "Yeah, car's already running. 5 minutes, he said. "We'll get breakfast on the way." My dad left the room, clomping around with those big galoshes he wore everywhere. So much, in fact, I used to think that they were part of his feet. My brother tossed from side to side, finally mustering the energy to get up. He tried to wake me, but I was dead to the world. I lay there motionless until he finally jumped on top of me, right on my stomach. I doubled over in pain, coughing. "Maddie, that hurt! Why'd you do that?" I screamed at him. He just smiled and beamed at me. "We're going to Grandma's," he replied with exuberance, then sadly, "I'm sorry about your tummy." He stood above me, holding out his hand. I was reluctant at first, but finally conceded. He lifted me to my feet. In the excitement of the early morning, we started to dress haphazardly. We threw on whatever we could find in the dim-lit room. The only light came from a single lamp. All ready to take on the day, we thumped down the stairs and out through the front door. Climbing into the car, we buckled and set off into that bleak, cruel morning of our youth. It was a long and stifling drive across those country roads. The car tucked through slush and snow as more came down. The wipers slashed back and forth like bat wings in a shallow cave, a sort of misfit soundtrack of the early morning drowsiness and sleep deprivation we all felt. Maddie and I were in the back seat, fastened tight and shivering uncontrollably. Mom turned around and asked how cold we were. "Just give it a little time, boys," she said. "It's an old car." I wanted to argue with Mom, but I knew what that conversation looked like. So I said okay, and turned towards the window, looking out. I watched the snow fall onto the treetops and stones in the field, beyond the distant wire fences that kept the cows from roaming. The snow lay in heaps and clumps along the roadside like fluffy pillows in an Arabic circular bed. I felt the growing coolness on my temple exuding from the window. I looked over at my brother, who had fallen back to sleep. Lucky kid. My parents were having a hushed conversation, something barely audible. I looked over at the window again, and I started to feel the heat finally. So I began to curl up by the window, arranging myself in a comfortable position. As I closed my eyes, I heard the muffled sound of my parents' voices. They sounded miles away, which was comforting. I felt myself drifting away. Before I opened my eyelids, I could hear fragments of conversation in the car. I knew my brother was near because his voice echoed loudly in that tight space. As my eyelids flittered and twitched open, I saw my mother in front of me, smiling and looking at me. "You boys could sleep through anything," she said. "A thunderstorm couldn't wake you." My dad released a hearty chuckle from up front, slapping the center console. "Oh, oh, you have no reason to laugh. You're exactly the same," Mom retorted. I saw that we weren't that far from Grandma's house. I remembered taking this drive before, so I thought I knew where we were. I straightened myself in my seat, looking at my brother, who was watching the tiny buildings of that sleepy town whiz past him. I knew we were only 2 towns away, and the sky began to drift from midnight black to the lighter hue of pinkish blue. He looked back at me, and we exchanged an unspoken excitement. We loved going to Grandma's house. There was so much to do for boys growing up. My grandfather took my brother to go out shoot one of the flutter of guns he kept, or with my dad in tow, they'd go fishing in some nearby lake. My brother just loved everything about being outdoors. The adventure, the thrill of the hunt, and finally the prize to be taken home. He'd even enjoy setting up the camp, living like that in nature. I really think he enjoyed that, to be away from it all. It was different with me. I usually stayed back in the house with Grandma. I would watch her bake cookies or bread. That was her domain in the kitchen, and she would spend countless hours in that tiny, unsightly kitchen, doing this and that. And sometimes I would sit in there and with her as she did her things, but mostly I was in the other room reading a book or watching some video she put on for me. But what I really loved the most was when we would take the walks along the wooded paths in the woods. We'd gingerly stroll on the leaves beneath our feet, noticing everything around us. The smell of the mulchy leaves and branches that had been sweltering in the sun, the unsteady wind picking up debris on the floor, whirling it around like some kind of a makeshift miniature tornado. The talking trees swaying back and forth, almost obstructing our walkways at times, and the buzzing sound of bees all around the honeycomb, straight above our heads. I was always frightened of the bees, so my grandma kept me safe. It was on one of those walks that I first saw the cherry tree. It was in the middle of autumn this time. We were coming back from the forest by the path along the river, and suddenly I saw it off in the distance. It was all alone in the center of the path. All the leaves and the cherries had fallen off, but still the tree held its magnificence. It radiated in the dusty, dim light of September as a guiding force for weary travelers. There seemed to be something magical about this tree. It talked to me, pulling me to it, like it was a guardian or gatekeeper of the forest and its secrets. And I knew that was a pact. It was attempting to communicate to me, but I didn't understand it then. Not yet. When we approached it, my grandmother grabbed my hand as we stared at it. "Do you like my new tree?" she said. Grandpa just picked it up." "I do, Grammy." "Is it sick?" I fervently asked. "No, darling. She grew some beautiful fruit, but it has all been picked off or fell down. Now it is time of year when she goes to sleep and rest till the spring. Don't worry. She's good and strong," my grandma said. "The tree, is it a she?" I asked. "Oh, how else would she be able to grow fruit? Those are her babies, just like you were your mom's baby," Grandma said. "Oh, I see," I replied. I could start to feel the wind pick up, and already the light that lay over that country sky was beginning to dwindle into the molten orange. Just beyond the tree was a sloping hill that emptied into a shallow river. It was shallow, and then at times could be very deep, but right now it was shallow, and You could see the reeds pendulate, stuck between little stones and clay, and rippling from the trees were the martins and swallows like bats out of a cave, with no aim or purpose. The swallows just flew around in circles, but the martins would swoop down in the water and feed, opening their tiny beaks to grab the insects on the surface of the water, to soar back up and feast. But it began to get darker on our path, and it was becoming less visible. "Let's go back into the house," Grandma said. "We'll have some supper." "Okay, Grammy," I replied. So we walked back to the house. Lighting our way was a singular light by the front doorstep that shone so bright. As we neared the steps, we began to stomp our feet on the concrete, discarded all the grass and dirt from the bottom of our shoes. We opened the door and took off our shoes and sat down on the table. I never spoke to my brother about that day and the cherry tree. We didn't go to Grandma's house as much during the school year as we did in the summer. We would sometimes spend weeks at a time out there in June or July. It was our kingdom away from responsibilities and rules, where we could stay up late and watch westerns with Grandpa, and Grandma would feed us like kings that we thought we were. So we'd forget about our kingdom during the year, and soon as summer came, we were begging our parents to go back there, each for his own reasons. Matty came to see the cherry tree, but he didn't know about it, not like I did. It's been a long time since I thought about that cherry tree, and the cottage house that hid between the rolling fields among the dusty one-way roads that swirled around those sleepy country years. The martins and the swallows diving through brush and weeds, coasting on sparkling water to engulf those little flies that made their homes on the water's surface. Or the dark, enchanted woods that were not far off, just a walk away, filled with the sounds and colors of autumn. And sometimes I miss how carefree everything was back then. No bills or appointments, alarm clocks or frustrations to weigh you down. I always wake up violently, in the grips of some wrestling match that I lost, leaving me disoriented and screaming like a maniac. Realizing it's just me in bed, I shuffle off towards the kitchen, flip on the coffee pot, and go into the bathroom, performing all the necessary tasks to get on with my day. From the back room, I can hear my cell phone going off, ringing. I try to ignore it at first, thinking, who could be calling at this hour of the morning, and what do they want? It keeps ringing, so I shut off my toothbrush, tossing it into my ditty bag. Mom, why does she always have to call so early? I could just call her back. Fuck, I'll forget. "Hi, Mom. Can you hold on for a second?" I say. "Sure," she replies. I set the phone down on the bed and gingerly stride into the kitchen. Pulling open the cabin door, I grab a cup and pour myself a hefty amount. I open the fridge door, trying to locate the milk, but can't find it, slamming the door in anger. I grab the cup and walk back into the main room, picking up the phone and walk outside, sitting down on the bench outside my apartment. It's a clear Los Angeles day. About 85 degrees and almost perfect as far as days go. But it's clear and early, and I'm in one of my regular moods, not wanting to be bothered at this point in the day. But it's Mom, so I answer. "Mom, I'm back. Sorry." "You just wake up?" she asks. For some reason, she can always tell when I just woke up. It's like one of her mom's superpowers or something. No matter how hard I try and hide it, even if I was just brushing my teeth or jumping off the airplane, she'd say, "You sound tired." "Yeah," I gruffly speak. "You want me to call you back?" I sip on my hot coffee and wait to reply. If I tell her yes, I'm liable to be doing something later, and I will in fact ignore that call, so it's just easier for me to stay on the phone. Plus, what am I actually doing right now besides drinking this coffee? Nothing. "No, Mom, this is fine. I have to leave later on, so this is good. What's up? Nothing, just haven't talked to you in a while, she says. It's all the same, really. They opened up a new grocery store near me, but I haven't tried it yet, I tell her. Don't you go to Trader Joe's anymore? I didn't say that, defensively, I answer. I'm just thinking that maybe I could try something else. Maybe. Are you still writing? Yes, Mom. I love my mother dearly, but sometimes when she calls, I get so impatient and want to slam the phone down. She asks me these simple questions, and for some reason send me off the deep end. Not that they're bad questions, but they're set at the wrong time. I'm not quite ready to hear them. Honey, you seem a little stressed out, she states awkwardly. No, Mom, I'm fine. Are you planning on coming home this summer? I don't think I can. Why? Although the truth is that I know exactly why she's asking me this. Happens every year around this time. Your grandma is having her yearly rummage sale, and it would be nice to have an extra hand around, she says with a tone. Mom, I thought we'd been through this, I tell her. I know, she says automatically. I mean, I can forget about Christmas and come, but I said, no, you're right. I just don't get why it's such a chore getting you here. She cuts me off. Listen, Mom, I really have to get going. John's expecting me soon. I try to cut the conversation short. Okay, talk to you soon. Love you. Love you too. And I hang up the phone, letting it sit on my lap. My coffee is still steaming from the cup, and I take a large gulp from it. It feels really good going down, so I take another one immediately. The coursing liquid somehow helps me brace what I'm not entirely ready to come to terms with. I haven't been to Grandma's place since that summer that the cherry tree was cut down. I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't. So again, I still see my grandmother. She's as dear as anyone I've ever met, more than I can describe. I just cannot go there anymore. Not after that. I sometimes think that it was all a dream invented in my head, if it wasn't for my mind remembering it so clearly. I began to dissect it inside, the time and place, her face glowing, and forever that kingly tree radiating in autumn's shimmering sunlight. It became at times like another voice in spirit, whose presence began to loom over the house, the table, and our activities. I don't know if my brother ever felt it at all. We never discussed it, nor could we. It seemed as if it was a secret Grandma and me had, and we became giddy as one gets on a Christmas. But were sworn not to mention upon pangs of death, so we kept silent. Even when it was cut down, we stood a ways off looking on. It appeared like a beheading or funeral procession, watching from a crowd among peasants in some provincial European village. I could imagine some throwing rotten fruit or yelling indecipherable obscenities to the towering stage above them, but it wasn't like that. It was quick and painless, though it seemed to keep continuing in me for days and months. And as months turned into years, it slowly faded from memory and was forgotten. Even the remains of the stump soon was lost among the grass and moss that began to grow on top of it. And it disappeared into the sunlight days and windy nights. There hasn't been any cherries for a long time now. It was many years since I first saw the cherry tree, as it hung in the azure-streamed sky, cascading among the wind, which it joined to dance with. The end was always the hardest when I was asked, silently and in confidence, to bury away everything I learned in those long, sultry months, to forget for 9 months of blistering cold. But I didn't forget, not really. I was in waiting for the end of May to approach. I could tell that time was nearing, not only because I could feel this energy bubbling up inside me. Also, my brother received some new clothes for hunting and was very excited about wearing them the next day. he was in the woods. I began to pack early this year. I couldn't handle the anticipation. I recently moved across the hall of the upstairs about a year ago, so I finally had my own room. I couldn't. Prior, they used to use it as a guest room, but since we live far out in the country, we didn't have many visitors. And if we ever did, I could always bunk back up with Maddie. We had our own space now, which I felt was very beneficial. I heard a knock on the door and pivoted my head, and the door opened and Maddie walked in. He crossed the room and sat next to me on the floor. "It's the last week of school," he said excitedly. "I know. Are you excited?" "Yeah. I'm done with this year. I want to go back." He beamed. "Me too," I said. I looked up at Maddie, who seemed to be down in his mouth. He seemed so sad, and I put my hand on his slumped-over shoulder. He didn't respond, but stayed in his funk. So I got up to my knees and next to him, and I began to lightly shake him with both hands. His body started to weave back and forth to the point of him losing control of his body. And then suddenly he fell over on his side. He let out a big scream, which followed with uncontrollable laughter. I sat watching him for a moment, cracking a smile, and I followed suit. I dramatically fainted and fell near him, laughing like a hyena as I did. After a while, the laughter began to die out because we were out of energy for the moment. It was silent, and I felt that I needed to say something to him. I was the older brother, after all. "I think we should ask them if we can go earlier to Grandma's," I proposed. "Plus, we will be done with school." "Would they say yes?" he asked me. "I don't know, but we gotta try." He propped himself on his arm, looked at me with those innocent eyes. He was trying to think about what he was going to say, and a couple start-stops happened. He began to get frustrated and finally was able to get something out. "You can tell them, right? You do it right." "Sure," I said. And he resumed his former position, with his head back, staring at the ceiling. The ceiling was acoustical, and for one birthday, my dad put up all these plastic glow-in-the-dark stars, which would light up like constellations in the sky. For the first couple of days, I was so enthralled by them that as soon as it became dark, I would go into my bedroom, become lost in the astronomical brilliance that was my tiny attic bedroom. I haven't really looked at them in some time. I took them for granted, though I really liked them. I turned my head and could see that Maddie was under their spell also. "They're neat, huh?" "Yeah, they are. I wish I had some," he thought aloud. He gave up a sigh of exhaustion, yawned, and began to curl up on the floor next to me. I smirked because I knew that in a matter of minutes he would be fast asleep, so I continued to look up at those plastic stars. They were not in the correct formation, but they were beautiful anyways. I used to pretend that Orion's belt was whatever I wanted it to be, and the Little Dipper would trail behind the Big Dipper, just as a baby duck follows its mama. And I thought how large the universe was, and how tiny we are in it. But I began to get tired, so I turned over on my side and let my head fall down on my arm. My mind wanted to go on with the sky and the stars and how big everything was now. But I knew that I needed to think about these coming up months. I couldn't wait. So I slowly drifted from consciousness to a little house crushed between plush farmland and endless flowing rivers, and was dead to the world around me. It was 2 weeks before we went back to the country of our youth. The day was so clear that you could trace the clouds with your fingertips. As the wind came down from the north and began to dissipate all the colorful shapes and animals in the sky, everything was just as we'd left it months ago. The cows and the horses just beyond the rickety fence that bound their property together barely moved along the grass, neighing and mooing under the sweltering noon May sky. Farther on from the house was the patches of strawberries, rhubarbs, and pumpkins. bushes brimming with wild raspberries, and corn stalks tall as scarecrows, towered above the rest of the vegetables in the garden. Everything was in full bloom, ready to be picked: peas, carrots, tiny radishes, and the plethora of herbs, flowers, and plants, all screaming the joyous occasion of summer's approaching time. And the grass was freshly mowed, which no doubt kept Grandpa busy for a good portion of the morning. Right behind the house, near the path, was a small duck pond, flush with mallards and wood ducks, splashing along the surface as they maneuvered, trying to spot bits of food to eat that floated along the top of the water. And the river, I was told this year, was unusually low, which Grandpa says is a pain in his ass because the fish won't come down due to the lack of room to move around. We quickly unloaded all the bags into the house. Had another feast, which was Grandma's specialty. After dinner was finished, Mom and Dad got into the car and drove off along the dust of the tiny gravel that lined the driveway, and they were gone. Another summer in paradise, under the smiling moon. We watched them leave and waited to hear the rustling of frogs and toads in the grass near our feet. As soon as the bats would come winging by the old metal street lamp that stood in the center by the cement walkway, we'd stand there until he finally smashed in it. My brother and I would giggle and point. "Hush, boys. He can't see, it's not his fault," my grandma used to say, holding back her snicker. "Grammy, what do you mean? He has no eyes?" my brother asked. "No," she retorted. "How does he move if he can't see?" "By his ears, honey," pointing to his ears. "Ah." But you could see that he didn't understand. In fact, neither did I. I didn't understand how something could move without the use of its eyes. I thought that would just be worse, a difficult life. My grandma motioned for us to go inside, and we followed her, closing the door behind us. People in the country never lock their doors. For some reason, there's no need to, which I've always considered strange. She made us some hot cocos and a bowl of popcorn, and we sat down to wind down in front of the TV. My brother looked at me with his large, funny-looking smile, smiled back. We were back where we wanted to be, at least for this moment in time. This was heaven right now. I woke up with the sun spread across my face like a mask, poking the one eye I could see. It was, in fact, morning. I gradually opened the other side and blinked them rapidly to adjust to the light. I put my arms on the bed, pulling my hips back against the pillow. I looked at my side, but it was empty. I felt the sheets were still a little warm. He must have just got up, so I got out of bed with a jump in my step, and I quickly dressed and came into the kitchen. They were all having breakfast. They all smiled and made various sounds to acknowledge my presence. "Hello, sleepyhead, get enough Z's?" "Mm-hmm," I lazily replied. "Why didn't you wake me?" "I'm not doing that again," Matt said with his arms crossed. "We don't know how you like your sleep." "We know how you like your sleep," Grandma said. "Sit down and grab some grub," Grandpa finally piped in. "Yeah, I'm so hungry," I said, holding my stomach. So I walked around the table, taking a seat between Grandma and Grandpa. I began to grab this and that until I had a proper plate full of breakfast goodies. Going to town as they looked at me with curiosity. "You ever eat before?" "We're going to have to talk to that mom of yours. Tell her she needs to feed you boys. You're grown after all," Grandpa says. "Hush," Grandma retorts. "Well, what do you boys want to do today?" "Shoot the gun," Matt screams out. We all stare at him, and he soon discovers that he literally said that as loud as he could. He shifts his eyes and starts to eat some more food to divert our attention. "Buckaroo, we can do that later. I have to go over to Schmitty's and help him with the tractor," sipping his coffee. Can I help?" Matt says earnestly. "Not with this. It's too dangerous. Next time. You boys can help me garden. How does that sound?" We both had food in our mouths, so we nod our heads in unison. And then something made us laugh, and pieces of food fall out of our mouths, which adds to the laughter. They both look at us, and then they look at each other, shaking their heads. "You know, you two are a bunch of loonies. If you're not careful, we'll put you in a home," Grandpa Grandma jokes. We get serious for a moment, closing our lips tight, trying to suppress the laughter. It slips out anyways and soon becomes uncontrollable. These kids are a lost cause, she mutters to Grandpa. So we finish the laughter that was left in us and continue to eat breakfast, just as we thought everything would be when we came back. That was the thing that we hoped and depended on. The things that wouldn't change and would always be the same, and for a long while they were. That whole summer, in fact, was wholly perfect. In the mornings we would have breakfast and then go off into the garden with Grandma, picking and eating the fruits of her labor, but mostly eating. We hardly brought anything back, and then we'd go off with Grandpa into the woods to empty his fox traps. Foxes would come on the property and try to eat the deer that roamed in the woods. Grandpa always said that they were nuisances. Sometimes we would shoot a gun, and since I was not that big on guns, I would go into the kitchen, watching Grandma make her bread. She took great pride in her buns. She would give them away to family members and friends, but my brother loved shooting that gun off. And sometimes we would take out the small fishing boat that Grandpa kept in the garage and go fishing on one of the small lakes close by. At night we would eat supper at the table. It was never dinner though, but always supper. Grandma never really explained why that was, only dinner was something city folk said, and I didn't care to argue with her. But at nights we mostly sat in the living room, watching the evening news or some Western Grandpa wanted to watch. Either way, we were happy. Sitting with a bowl of popcorn on top of the cowboy and Indian sofa that should have been tossed away, but it always stayed. That's what I really loved about their place, was a feeling of permanence that surrounded everything there. That things not only wouldn't change, but absolutely couldn't. Or at least we thought. It was towards the end of that summer, maybe a week before we were supposed to go back home. Maddie and I were with Grandma in town to pick up some things at the grocery store. We were gone maybe an hour, and as the car turned into the gravel driveway, I could barely see a couple of men in the yard further off. One of them was holding something in his hand, but I couldn't tell what it was from the car. We parked the car in the garage and got out and began to grab the grocery bags, trying to hold as many as we could to show Grandma that we were men. "Boys, only carry as much as you can," she said sternly. "Don't drop anything." "Okay, Grammy." We took off, each carrying one hefty bag, and started to make our way up the steps to the front door. Grandma walked behind us, opening the door, and held it open for us. We walked in and set the bags on the kitchen table. Attempting to take off our shoes, she stopped us in our tracks. "What are you boys doing? There's still more in the car." We huffed and puffed for a bit, pulling our shoes back on. We marched outside with a purpose. As I approached the garage, I stopped, watching these men with Grandpa by the cherry tree. My brother stopped next to me. We were unsure about what they were doing. I saw one man on his knees with a tape measure and pencil as he made marks on the bark. I blankly stared at him, trying to figure out what he was doing to my tree. I couldn't understand. I didn't know enough about trees, and Grandpa was there. I knew he wouldn't let them hurt my tree. After a few moments, I saw one grab a hold of something. The same thing I saw before, but this time it was closer. I knew that it was. It was an axe, shimmering in the summer glow. I was hypnotized for a moment, allowing it to sparkle all the way to my eyeball. And with every glint, I could see the blood dripping from the tree, like water coming from a spout. I became paralyzed, and I couldn't move, though I felt as if I was running like lightning. I could sense this cord in me break open, spilling out down into the very extraneous polars of my toes, and the coldness that followed. But suddenly, I was able to muster some energy. and I took off towards the tree, making great strides, but they were far away. And I thought I was screaming, but still, I'm unsure if I was or if it was just echoing in my head. Either way, it had no effect because I soon saw the glisten of the blade being raised higher and higher above his head. It looked like it was motionless up there, frozen. But so was I. I heard the pounding of its heart, as fully as I feel mine. Hurting, crunching, pulsating. And then, suddenly, I couldn't take it anymore. The blade fell into the bottom of that bright, healthy trunk. Deep incisions into it, ripping apart the neat bark. Fragments and shards sprayed across the grass. And I thought I saw a tear. But I might have been delirious. I'm not sure. A second later, the tree fell. That gallant being, the silent guardian that would stand watch over the grounds when we were fast asleep, was no more. A moment later, Grandma and Maddie joined me as the tree fell down to its low height. We all held each other for a moment. She looked over at me, a single tear glistening down my cheek. She took her thumb and wiped it off. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked, trying to pick apart trying to pick apart one emotion in the sea of crashing feelings was too much. But I had to answer her. She was staring at me, and so was Maddie, so I took a breath and said very slowly, "That was our tree." "I know, honey, but we'll get a new one. This one was sick." She squeezed my shoulder, unable of what to say. Those last couple weeks, I basically just sat in the room, stared off at the stub in the yard. I wanted to go home. There was nothing for me here anymore. We were supposed to have 2 more weeks out there, but I called Mom, told her that I wanted to be picked up early. She asked me why, and I told her I couldn't talk about it. She said she could do a couple days earlier, but that was all. When they finally came and got us, she asked Grandma about my mood change. Grandma said she didn't know why. I just out of the blue became adamant about going home. But she knew. And sometimes when I see her now, there are glimpses of that secret hidden in her eyes. She had a good poker face, though. Mom couldn't figure it out, and Maddie couldn't figure it out either. He would never have thought to leave their house, especially over a tree. But she never asked me again, and it died there, as far as they were concerned. School was about to begin, and I was determined to throw myself in whatever activities would keep me distracted, and that worked because I hardly thought about the tree, or their cottage home nestled among the swallowing clouds and long, winding, narrow roads that would drown on forever as far as the eye could see. And it soon disappeared into mystery and forgotten tale, but I never went back to their place. I was very serious and stubborn. Mom never tried to push me further, but I saw them for holidays and get-togethers. Grandpa and Maddie never really understood and thought it was all in my mind, and eventually I would get over it. So months came and went, eventually turning into years. I did forget, as if life leads you in so many different ways. I moved away from home, somewhere completely different, and let that memory slowly fade to the forest floor of my mind, barely twinkling in the dim chandelier there. It's been 15 years since the day at the cusp of summer, but I remember it all as if it happened yesterday. I forgot the events, but also they live inside me, so. And usually, it never crossed my mind, but when it does, it's like cancer, eating me apart and regurgitating my memories all over my apartment floor. I live alone now, which is what I wanted. It's nice. I have a small studio at the base of Griffith Park in LA. It's small, but I enjoy it because I don't have that much to look after. It's easier when one doesn't have that much responsibility. It's easier to manage. I have a car also, this little Asian thing that gets me around just fine. I have a job, but I could really care less about it. Some days I think this is helping me to live, while other days it just keeps me from writing. I usually keep to myself most of the time with a small group of friends that I see from time to time, and I keep in touch with family, but I don't go home much. I woke up this morning early for living in LA. I was up on my way by 9:30, so I could be to the cafe by 10. It was a beautiful morning. The sky was mostly clear with a couple of morphing clouds overhead, a light breeze that brushed my cheeks and filled my hair. It was the optimal time to write. So I walked inside the cafe and got my usual double espresso and walked out to the seafoam green table with matching chair and set up for a long productive session. I find it's always so difficult to begin, and I'm extremely jealous of writers who don't have that problem. Not just the beginning, but the start of every session seems like pulling teeth, like I always seem to push forward. I began to read over what I did yesterday, staring at it and trying to find that spurt of inspiration to move on. But it's not coming yet. As I sip on this double espresso, which is so good, and I think they switched beans. My phone started to ring in my pocket. I pull it out and press talk. Yeah, this is Matthew, your brother. Matt says. You weirdo, what's up? Not much, just got a ticket for home for the holidays. Did you buy yours yet? Maybe we can get it at the same time. I'm like, I didn't. I'm not sure if I'm going to come home right now. I say sheepishly. You always say that. Every year. It's not true. I went back, I stumble on my words. Exactly. You can't even remember the last time. It's been 3 years since you've been back. Every year Mom gets so sad when you don't come. It wears on her. He's prodding me. I know she does. I'm just not sure what you want from me. There's a silence for a moment. He's trying to figure out what to say. I know what's coming after. I begin to brace myself. Why do you always do this shit? He says with this tone. It's always like this for you. We come to LA and everything is great. We have fun and all, but as soon as we bring up coming back home, you just become so stubborn and difficult. Yeah, unable to come up with anything better. Yeah, what? He says. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, I answer angrily. So you're not going to change your mind? No, I tell him. He doesn't say anything, but I can hear noises happening in his mouth. He is working out something in him that I know I won't change my mind about it, but I know that I need to calm him down. Tell you what, I'll think about it, okay? I'm on a deadline with this first draft. If I can make some major headway before the 1st of November, I might be able to swing it, but I'm not making any promises. That's all I ask, just to think about it, he replies. Right. I'm actually about to write, so I guess I'll let you go, hoping to ditch him. Yeah, I get you, Mr. Writer Man. Oh, by the way, congrats on the book, he says. Thanks, man, I say. Well, I don't want to keep you. Also, hope your birthday went well. Yes, it did. Talk to you later, brother, I quickly say. And I quickly hang up the phone, throwing it on the table. I take another sip from the espresso, letting the now lukewarm liquid course down my throat, filling me with its bitter, grainy goodness. I go back to the task at hand, tapping on the table. I can't forget the annoying conversation I just had with my brother. He knows what buttons to press to get me out of sorts and keep me distracted, so I don't care to go home. It's all the same, and it becomes so awkward way too fast. I enjoy it for a day or two, and then I feel trapped and just want to be anywhere but here. I know he means well and all, but I just can't do it. Maybe next year or the year after, when I'm not busy with this novel. I sit there staring at the screen, drifting off into my head, and thinking about home and the past. My thoughts go to that very far gone day at the cottage, and I try to push it out of my mind. I remember all the events as they happened in a movie, maybe. Very short bits, violent, in and leave the same, with the residual that resides in my core. The freshly cut stump in the middle of the path shone during the afternoon glow of summer's ray. Us that day surrounded in awe and sadness. We knew that things had changed that can't be undone, and that's what my brother really doesn't understand. He always took everything like a cool breeze, letting it blow by him and moving on to the next thing, while I take a sting like that to my core, letting it fill me up, bound tightly in memories and hold it dear. So no, I cannot forget it. And home brings all that pain back to me. And while I cannot forget it, I wish to keep it at bay and choose not to look at it. The one thing about that day that nobody seems to understand is what that cherry tree really was. My grandma asked me, "What's wrong, honey?" And I couldn't properly answer her. And I didn't have the strength at the time. That tree was all that was beautiful and innocent in this world to me then. It it was how I saw my grandmother. And the and through that tree I saw true glimpses of a person loving something unconditionally. And when the tree died, it seemed like love passed and was forgotten in the fire of time. I couldn't even properly explain it now, why I felt like that back then. All I know is that I did, and because I had to. I needed that tree more than I ever needed anything else in the world, or ever will need something. My grandmother still lives on the same property, with the same mailbox, in the same town, but her house is gone. The small cottage nestled among the rolling hills and burnt black steeples, perched high above the farms and the childish fields that shouted of bygone days. That home burned when the cherry tree was destroyed. I still love her, but I don't know where she resides anymore. I couldn't mail a letter if I had to. But that tree lives inside my mind. I once believed that that tree maybe was the entrance to the land of the fairies. And sometimes I thought that they might come out to play, sharing their fairy games and toys, and invite us along on an adventure to lost lands where we might stay stay out our days and live on in legend. That was a long time ago. And there are pieces that can never be put back together. But I did love that tree. And when it fell, something broke that day. A change in the fabric as one crushes an ant. That once done cannot be undone. And I saw forever crashing down. But I had no smile with my single glistening tear in the sun rays of a home in the whispering grass of my youth. To be forever up in the earth, lost and alive, only in the soul of a murdered being. And that's how it remained for some time.